You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we are in the immediate aftermath of Pam Bondi's confirmation hearing with the Senate Judiciary Committee. I want to draw your attention to a few claims that surfaced during this hearing. Senator Hirono asked whether she agrees with Trump's claim that, for example, the felons convicted of breaking into the Capitol on January 6th were hostages or patriots. She said that she's not familiar with that statement. Senator Hirono then said that illegal immigration is poisoning the blood of our nation if she agrees with that claim, to which Bondi said she's not familiar with that statement. There were a lot of claims floating around online about the prospect of Bondi not telling the truth, of her perjuring herself by virtue of saying stuff like this, saying that she's not familiar with these statements that were plenty readily available in the zeitgeist. So can you speak on what the bar is for perjury during a confirmation hearing?
Yeah, Brian, if you knowingly make a false statement and that statement is material, that is relevant to the subject matter of what you're discussing. So if you lie about what you had for breakfast before the confirmation hearing, that probably wouldn't be material to your qualifications as Attorney General. Wouldn't be a good thing to lie about. But, perjury rarely gets prosecuted. Why? A couple of reasons. First of all, as a former career prosecutor, 30 years, I'd put people in the grand jury. I would call people as witnesses at trial. And unfortunately, there was a whole lot of lying that went on. Sometimes it was subtle. Sometimes it was not necessarily intentional. Often it was intentional. But what I'm going to say up front is that rarely do prosecutors bring perjury charges. Why? Because it's a capacity and resource issue. We can't go chasing everybody who lied or fudged the facts in any of these settings where they are testifying under oath. But I will tell you, Brian, having worked for decades at the Department of Justice and having worked under many attorneys general, I watched closely what Pam Bondi was saying in her answers to the questions being posed to her by senators, which are designed to establish whether she's qualified, whether she has the right stuff to lead our nation's premier law enforcement agency. And I have to say, I winced several times when I heard some of the representations she made. For example, she was asked about Donald Trump's statement to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, just find me 11,780 votes and declare me the winner of the election. And she said, well, I really haven't heard that statement. Wow, it was played on an endless loop for years. How is it that you haven't heard that statement? Now, we're going to get to the question about whether that was a lie, and even if it was a lie, whether it was perjury, and even if it was perjury, whether it could be pursued or would be pursued criminally. But that wasn't the only statement that made me wince. She was asked, as you mentioned, well, Donald Trump is calling the J6 defendants who have been convicted of crimes hostages and patriots. And she said, I'm not familiar with those statements. Really? And then she was asked about Donald Trump's nominee to be the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, somebody that she would supervise because she would be over the top of Kash Patel if she's confirmed as Attorney General. She said, she was asked, Kash Patel has an enemies list in his book, Government Gangsters, and she said, oh, I'm not really familiar that he has an enemies list. I mean, come on, lady. How many of these things do you expect us to believe? Now, let me be clear, Brian. I'm not saying she lied about these things. Maybe she hasn't turned on the news in 4 years. I don't know, right? Here's the thing. If anybody wanted to determine whether this was a lie and whether it was actionable, you'd have to conduct an investigation. You would have to, for example, go to Pam Bondi's friends, her coworkers, her associates, her family members, and say, did you and Pam ever talk about the fact that Donald Trump asked the Secretary of State to find him 11,780 votes? Oh, yeah, she mentioned how crazy that was. Bingo. Now you have evidence that she was not straight with the senators in her confirmation testimony. Then the next question is, would that be charged as a crime? Now, we throw around the term perjury. Perjury is basically a lie under oath that is material to the subject matter of the testimony. But, you don't even have to be under oath. If you lie to a congressional committee, it's actually what's called a 1001 statement. in the federal law. Why do we call it that? Because that crime, lying to a congressional committee, whether under oath or not, is chargeable under 18 United States Code Section 1001. So if you lie when you're testifying before a congressional committee, a House committee, Senate committee, you're committing a 1001 violation. How often do we see 1001 violations prosecuted? Very, very rarely. Let me give you an example of one that went unprosecuted that I think was a lie based on watching the testimony of Bill Barr when he was being examined, questioned by then Senator Kamala Harris, and she asked him point blank, did anybody at the White House suggest to you that you should open a criminal investigation on anyone? Remember what he did, Brian? He hemmed and he hawed and he yammered and he stammered and he actually had to, quote, grapple with what the word suggested means. I don't know what suggested means.
I remember that.
And remember, he was so desperate not to answer the question directly, probably because the answer was, of course, Donald Trump asked me to investigate people, that he finally settled on this answer. I don't know. You know what, Brian? I don't know is not a perjury-proof answer if he did know. What would it take to prove that he committed a 1001 violation? A simple investigation of other people who were around if Donald Trump said, hey, Bill, I want you to investigate this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. That puts the lie to Bill Barr's Senate testimony that I don't know if anyone asked me to open an investigation. It's rarely done. Why is it rarely done? Well, Brian, this is a sore spot with me. We don't seem to have an appetite to hold the ruling class criminals accountable for their crimes, which is exactly why we have the government we have today.
Glenn, I want to turn your attention to another clip. This was during questioning between Senator Coons and Pam Bondi.
But let's imagine that once again, President-elect Trump issues a directive or order to you or to the FBI director that is outside the boundaries of ethics or law. What will you do?
Senator, I will never speak on a hypothetical, especially one saying that the president would do something illegal.
So two issues here, Glenn. One is this bizarre standard that Pam Bondi couldn't possibly allow herself to speak on a hypothetical. God forbid anybody spoke on a hypothetical here. That's apparently outside the realm of what you could reasonably ask a nominee for Attorney General to do. But then beyond that, she goes, especially one that the president would do something illegal. Donald J. Trump, of all people, let's disabuse ourselves of the notion that this beacon of virtue and honesty and integrity could ever even fathom the idea of doing something illegal. And of course, she says this as Donald Trump is currently a convicted felon and was indicted in 3 other cases in Georgia, Washington, D.C., and Florida. But God forbid we even suggest, God forbid we entertain the notion that that person could ever do something illegal. Can I have your take on that?
Yeah, the weakness of her answers was pretty astonishing. You know, some of these questions were softballs. They were gimmies, like if Donald Trump ordered you in your capacity as Attorney General to do something illegal, would you do it? Oh, right. Well, that's a hypothetical. I can't. Of course, the answer is no, I would not. I don't expect him to because, you know, she's still got to sort of please the king. I don't expect him to, but no, of course I wouldn't. Now, I'm going to give her credit because in some of the other questions from some of the other senators, she did say she kind of moved in favor of saying, listen, Donald Trump, anybody, if I am told to do anything other than follow the facts and follow the law where they lead, I'm not going to do it. So it was kind of one step removed from what I would have liked a future Attorney General to say. But she did try to make that point elsewhere in her testimony. And here's the other thing. Listen, she will never earn the label a point of light amidst the Trump darkness. However, Pam Bondi did say, well, even though I didn't know Kash Patel published an enemies list, she said, there will be no enemies list at the Department of Justice if I'm confirmed as Attorney General. Now, mind you, that's something, not exactly a beacon of light, but it's at least something. But then, you know, she gives us a little something and then she takes a whole lot of something away when she
taketh away when she refused
over and over, Brian, to say that Joe Biden was legitimately elected. So yes, it looks like we may very well have an election denier as our Attorney General.
Well, Glenn, to that point then, we'll finish off with this. When you have somebody who is very likely to be confirmed, it doesn't look like she's getting any pushback by the Republican conference, and yet this is somebody who harbors, to your exact point, election denialism. We saw that plain as day in these questions with numerous senators. She did it with Senator Schiff. She did it with Senator Durbin. She did it with Senator Whitehouse. All refused. She would deign to acknowledge that Joe Biden is the president, which, thank God, I guess, like low bar to clear, acknowledging that Joe Biden is the sitting president of the United States, but wouldn't acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. But when we get assurances, for example, that, okay, there will be no enemies list, or that I wouldn't be an attorney general if I was asked to do something improper, which was her response to Senator Coons, this is all being said at a confirmation hearing, and we've seen the degree to which the nominees, once confirmed, don't have to abide by what they said at the confirmation hearing. I mean, you had all of the Supreme Court justices who sit on the court who fell over themselves talking about how important stare decisis was, this idea of precedent, and especially as it relates to Roe versus Wade. And look where we are right now. All of them voted happily to overturn Roe versus Wade. So can you speak on the disparity here between some of the assurances that Pam Bondi gave as it relates to Donald Trump doing something improper and whether she would act as a bulwark against that versus what she will actually be forced to do once she's actually confirmed?
Brian, I was neither comforted nor inspired that, Pam Bondi will do the right things under all circumstances. There was one question that she was asked, I think on multiple occasions. They said that you have previously said you will prosecute the prosecutors and you will investigate the investigators. Inferentially, the people that helped Biden steal an election or the people who wrongfully went after Donald Trump. And what she said in response to that was a couple of things. She said, well, I was talking on TV, and you're forgetting to mention that I said, I will prosecute the prosecutors if they're bad. I just wish somebody had said to her,
what does that mean?
You're a longtime prosecutor. You've been a state attorney general for 2 terms in Florida. You do understand we don't prosecute people for doing bad things. We prosecute people for doing criminal things. So it is really not much of a defense to your ill-advised statements that, knowing nothing about the evidence, you're popping off on TV saying, I will prosecute the prosecutors and investigate the investigators, but just the bad ones. Again, that didn't instill confidence in me. So I don't know if she is just, a more cleaned up version of a Bill Barr, or if she really has what it takes to flex her independence muscle and push back against Donald Trump when, not if, he begins to try to misuse the Justice Department.
And I would presume the answer to that would be the former, but unfortunately, we will very likely have the opportunity to see, as it doesn't look like there's going to be much pushback among the Republican senators right now. I mean, if these people who presumably, the Republicans as part of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who presumably have the most adherence to the bench, to the federal bench, to this idea of law and order, to the DOJ and the Attorney General, if these people were so unwilling to show some minimum standard of deference to the law, if these people are willing to give her such a free pass, as we saw in this confirmation hearing, then it doesn't look like there's much hope for the broader Senate, where Republicans, of course, will have a majority of a few seats. So remains to be seen what happens here, but this will unfortunately very likely be a main character that we're going to be discussing for the next few years moving forward. So, of course, for those who are watching right now, if you want to be able to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.